3 weeks before he died, an 82-year-old retired lieutenant colonel sat at his kitchen table, put on a pair of oversized glasses, and told the world he had helped rebuild a flying saucer. For 35 years, Philip J. Corso had kept that story to himself. A decorated Army intelligence officer, a former staff member on President Eisenhower's National Security Council, a man who had briefed senators and handled classified files for 2 decades. Then, in 1997, he broke his silence in a book called The Day After Roswell, claiming that alien technology from the 1947 Roswell crash had been quietly funneled into American industry, seeding everything from fiber optics to integrated circuits. To some, Corso became a whistleblower from the heart of the Cold War machine. To others, he was something else, the aging source behind what one major newspaper later placed on a list of the top 10 literary hoaxes of the 20th century. Tonight, we open file 12 to 19, The Colonel's Confession, the man behind the claim. Philip J. Corso's military resume is not in dispute. He served in the U.S. Army from 1942 to 1963, rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel, working in intelligence in World War II and Korea. In the 1950s, he spent several years on Eisenhower's National Security Council, then later became chief of the Army's Foreign Technology Desk in the Pentagon's Research and Development Branch. That last posting is crucial. The Foreign Technology Desk handled exactly what its name implies: foreign hardware, captured equipment, enemy innovations. In the arms race of the Cold War, whoever understood the other side's technology first had an advantage. In later interviews, Corso presents this job as a doorway through which something else entered: American industry, not Soviet radar. Not German optics, but artifacts from a crashed craft recovered near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Publicly, the Roswell story is familiar. A rancher finds strange debris. The local base briefly announces a flying disc. Within a day, the statement is withdrawn, and the wreckage is said to be a weather balloon. Decades later, declassified material reveals the balloon was part of Project Mogul, a classified program using high-altitude arrays to listen for Soviet nuclear tests. In 1994 and 1997, the U.S. Air Force publishes lengthy reports. Their conclusion: the debris fits a Mogul balloon train, and the later stories of alien bodies come from misremembered crash tests and unrelated accidents. No extraterrestrial craft. No bodies. Case closed. Corso's book opens that case again and throws out almost everything in the official record. The crate at Fort Riley. In The Day After Roswell and in interviews, Corso says his first brush with Roswell came not in New Mexico, but in Kansas. In 1947, then Major Corso was at Fort Riley when a shipment arrived from Roswell. Inside a sealed crate, he claims, was a preserved body, small, 4 feet tall, thin, with a large head, 4-fingered hands, and oversized black eyes. In the magazine interview, he repeats the broad outline: a creature suspended in fluid inside a wooden crate, described as a clone whose body deteriorated quickly. He calls them extraterrestrial biological entities, engineered beings rather than natural organisms. No document has surfaced to corroborate that a crate from Roswell was ever shipped through Fort Riley. No log, no shipping order, no photograph. The story rests on Corso's memory alone half a century after the fact. Yet the image is powerful. A mid-century Army base, fluorescent lights humming over a wooden box, and inside a body that shouldn't exist. The Foreign Technology Desk. Corso's central claim is not about bodies. It's about hardware. In 1961, he took over the Pentagon's Foreign Technology Desk. According to him, the office safe contained not just Soviet equipment, but remnants of the Roswell craft. Wafer-thin integrated circuits, flexible glass-like filaments, strange optical lenses, and a memory. Metal that crumpled and then snapped back to its original form. In the magazine interview, he lists them in more detail. Single filament glass fibers, clearer and thinner than copper wire. Thin, gray wafers etched with patterns, what he believes were integrated circuits. Dark, skin-thin elliptical lenses, supposedly adapted into night vision goggles. A metallic fabric that could not be wrinkled or torn, returning to its shape. An early description of so-called memory metal. A headband lined with tiny sensors, which he says responded to brain waves. Corso says his job was to seed these artifacts into American industry without revealing their origin. He describes quietly handing samples to private companies that were already working on similar problems, letting their engineers reverse engineer the materials, patent the results, and then feed those innovations back into military programs. The only rule, he claims, was that nobody could document where the original samples came from. If true, this would be one of the most consequential technology transfer programs in history. Alien hardware routed through Bell Labs, Fairchild, and other Cold War contractors, spawning the electronics revolution of the late 20th century. But when we compare his timeline to the actual development of those technologies, the picture shifts. Technology that arrived after Roswell. Integrated circuits, the backbone of modern electronics, were conceived and prototyped in the 1950s. British engineer Geoffrey Dummer outlined the idea in 1952. In 1958, Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments built the first working integrated circuit. Within a year, Robert Noyce at Fairchild Semiconductor developed the planar integrated circuit that became the industry standard. Fiber optics followed a similar pattern. Experiments with transmitting light through glass fibers began early in the 20th century. By the 1950s and 1960s, researchers were demonstrating practical fiber optic systems. Physicist Narendra Singh Kapani popularized the term fiber optics in 1960, and patents for communications applications followed within a few years. Night vision technology predates Roswell entirely. German forces deployed infrared night vision devices as early as 1939, and both Axis and Allied scientists experimented with image-intensifying optics during World War II. In other words, the technologies Corso highlights have clear terrestrial development paths, documented engineers, labs, patents, and prototypes, many of them underway before he ever allegedly opened that Pentagon safe. This doesn't disprove that exotic artifacts existed. It does undercut the idea that human scientists needed alien prototypes to make those leaps. If you imagine global technology history as a river, Corso is saying a meteor fell into it in 1947 and changed its course. The archival record looks more like many streams of research slowly converging. The SDI connection. In his book, Corso takes his story one step further. He claims that the 1980 Strategic Defense Initiative, Ronald Reagan's proposed space-based missile shield, dubbed Star Wars, drew on technology derived from the Roswell craft. High-energy particle beams, advanced sensors, directed energy weapons, all, he suggests, were outgrowths of studying alien systems. He also hints at a deeper motive. SDI, he says, was not only about deterring Soviet missiles. It was about building a shield against whatever was piloting the craft that had been quietly entering Earth's atmosphere for decades. In this telling, the Cold War's most ambitious defense project wasn't just pointed at Moscow. It was pointed at the sky. Here again, the documentary trail doesn't match the drama. Declassified SD, high-planning documents and technical briefings show ambitious, often unrealistic proposals, but they are grounded in known physics and incremental advances in radar, optics, and computing. They read like engineers stretching existing capabilities, not stitching alien hardware into orbiting battle stations. Still, Corso's framing taps into a potent fear of the era, that the great powers might discover a common enemy above them and quietly reorient their arsenals accordingly. The paper trail and the pushback. What can we verify about Corso's extraordinary claims? We can confirm his rank, his postings, and his presence in the corridors of power. Publisher biographies, Senate records, and independent reporting all support his role in Army intelligence, his NSC staff position, and his leadership of the Foreign Technology Desk. We can confirm that the day after Roswell was real, that it was co-written and heavily shaped by ghostwriter William J. Byrnes, and that it became a bestseller, keeping Roswell in the headlines during the incident's 50th anniversary. We can also confirm the scale of the backlash. Analysts and UFO researchers, including some who are otherwise sympathetic to crashed saucer claims, have cataloged numerous basic errors in Corso's narrative: misidentified Air Force units, incorrect dates for well-documented events, and technical mistakes like describing a radar-guided missile as heat-seeking. Strom Thurmond, the powerful senator who had once worked with Corso and agreed to write a foreword, later demanded that his endorsement be removed after discovering the book centered on UFOs rather than a conventional memoir. In 2011, a declassified note from the UK Ministry of Defence summarized the British view bluntly. Corso's book was dismissed because he had a previous track record of unreliable testimony. The net effect is harsh. To skeptics, the day after Roswell is not a whistleblower's archive, but a tangle of exaggerations and impossibilities, layered over a real military career. So what do we do with Philip Corso? One reading, the believer's reading, takes him largely at his word. In this view, his proven access to classified programs, combined with his consistent recounting of certain details, outweighs the factual slips and missing documents. The history of reverse-engineered technology is flushed, classified, buried in corporate labs. The lack of paperwork is exactly what you'd expect from a compartmentalized program designed to hide its own origin. A second reading treats Corso as an unreliable narrator who blended real experience with decades of UFO lore. He did work in foreign technology. He did see cutting-edge prototypes. Over time, as stories about Roswell grew and circulated, those memories might have been refiled under a different label. Like a photocopy of a photocopy, each retelling introduced distortions. By the 1990s, with a ghostwriter shaping his recollections for a commercial book, that mixture of genuine Cold War secrecy and popular myth solidified into a single dramatic narrative. There's a third, more uncomfortable possibility. Corso's book arrived at a moment when Roswell was becoming an industry. Documentaries, conferences, tourism, competing, inside sources. Publishers knew there was money in a new angle. The day after Roswell provided exactly that. Not just a crashed saucer, but a grand claim that modern technology itself was a byproduct of alien debris. In this reading, Corso may have been nudged by co-writers, by editors, by his own awareness of what would sell, toward a story bigger than the facts could sustain. Each interpretation has problems. If Corso is telling the literal truth, we have to accept that no supporting document, no corroborating witness of similar rank, no surviving memo has surfaced in the decades since, despite intense Freedom of Information Act efforts and the declassification of vast Cold War archives. If he's misremembering, we have to explain the precision with which he insists on certain experiences. like the crate at Fort Riley or the texture of the so-called memory metal. Memory is fallible, but it often fails more subtly than this, changing edges rather than fabricating entire episodes. If commercial pressures shape the story, we still have to account for why. Corso, a man proud of his service and aware of how easily he could be fact-checked, was willing to attach his real name and real record to a narrative that could be dismantled by anyone with an Air Force almanac. Somewhere inside those tensions between pride and myth, secrecy and storytelling is the heart of this case. The mystery after Roswell. The official Roswell file is thick. Balloon components, weather records, launch logs, long technical appendices explaining why tinfoil, sticks, and neoprene radar reflectors were once mistaken for something stranger. The Corso file is thin. A memoir, a handful of interviews, and the recollections of those who knew him. We can reconstruct his career. We can show where his technical claims collide with the established history of electronics. We can point to the documented errors in his book. What we can't fully map is a gap between the colonel who served on the National Security Council and the elderly man who, decades later, looked into a camera and calmly described seeding alien hardware into American corporations. Maybe he was finally telling a secret he had carried since 1947. Maybe he was giving shape to a lifetime of classified work through the only lens the public seemed willing to look through, the Roswell myth. Or maybe he was doing what humans have always done with unexplained events and half-remembered files, building a narrative that feels truer than the dull, bureaucratic reality. We solved much of what happened at Roswell. A balloon program, Cold War secrecy, a story that refused to die. What remains unresolved is why men like Philip Corso chose, at the end of their lives, to stand inside that story and claim a part of it. Until we find a document we haven't seen, a memo, a log, a fragment of alloy that doesn't fit any earthly metallurgy, the truth behind the colonel's confession stays in that space between the archive and the imagination, because every mystery hides a truth. The question is whether Corso's truth was out there in the desert or only in the way he chose to remember it.